Despite being the 8th installment in a long-running series, the newest God of War is a beast of its own. It continues the storyline of its predecessors, but revamps their combat, pacing, and flow. It takes their linear structure and morphs it into an open-ended world. And although God of War effectively iterates on the franchise's own identity, it borrows from many outside sources as well, some of which are more surprising than you might think. Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night have inspired a multitude of games. This subgenre, affectionately called Metroidvanias, features interconnected worlds in which certain paths are blocked until you unlock specific abilities. Through backtracking and exploration, these games can integrate story and gameplay into a much closer relationship. I recently spoke with Cory Barlog, God of War's creative director, over the phone, and he mentioned Symphony of the Night as one of the chief influences throughout his development career.
It's like the closest to perfection for me as a gamer that I've had, with so many different aspects of the beginning of the game, setting you up to lose everything and desire to get back and get it back better than ever. That has resonated and stuck with me for so long that it influences everything that I do. So, like the sort of Metroidvania design philosophy is something that I think is sort of deeply rooted in just the way that I approach all problems.
God of War is full of enticing dead ends and secrets just out of reach. As in Metroidvanias, you're learning new layers of God of War at a steady pace. Each new ability allows you to reevaluate the world. You traverse every area again, seeing your surroundings through a new lens. Certain puzzles now make sense. Old enemies reveal new weaknesses. Whole side areas open up, beckoning you forward, teasing new pathways that may or may not require further learning to progress. It's one of those rare games that makes backtracking fun. Another recent third-person action game put the Metroidvania formula to good use. 2015's Rise of the Tomb Raider uses similar item gating to funnel you through its world. In fact, it does so almost right away, pitting you against a vicious grizzly bear, only letting you get by it once you learn to craft poison arrows. Once past the bear, a whole new sandbox area opens up. Cue the exploration. Rise of the Tomb Raider and God of War have more in common than this overall structure, though. Barlog was lead animator on God of War and game director for God of War 2. He worked on God of War 3 for 9 months before leaving Sony Santa Monica for a new project. That project was the 2013 Tomb Raider reboot. This game also uses a light Metroidvania approach, morphing the linear legacy of Tomb Raider into one of sandbox level design. 2 years later, Metroidvania aspects became even more prevalent in the sequel. Subsequently, several of Rise of the Tomb Raider's designers moved over to God of War during the latter's creation. Because of this, there's a fair amount of osmosis between the two projects. As Barlog says, the video game industry is one big melting pot of ideas, games that bleed into other games, projects that iterate on those that came before them. If you dig deep enough into any new release, you'll find the DNA of dozens of other games. But there are structural similarities between Rise of the Tomb Raider and God of War. Like the Crystal Dynamics project, God of War makes use of a massive hub connecting smaller side areas. Each time you return to the Lake of Nine, you have more abilities to use, expanding the world with new areas and reinforcing your knowledge of existing ones. It brings you closer to the world and the characters you're spending so much time with. And speaking of characters, that brings us to The Last of Us. Barlog has spoken extensively about Joel and Ellie's influence on his game. The relationship between Naughty Dog's iconic duo is the centerpiece of The Last of Us, and the dynamic between Kratos and his son is a pillar of God of War. Their journeys affect them not just as individuals, but also as teams. They grow alongside each other. They fall down, they pick each other back up. In speaking with Barlog, there are numerous inspirations that helped God of War take shape. Some of them lie outside video games, such as the films Rope, Birdman, or Hardboiled, movies that make use of long takes to bring in immediacy to the ongoing story. Then there are characters such as Quint from Jaws or Adrian Monk, who inspired some of God of War's more colorful personalities. And of course, there's the Norse mythology that fuels the series' new narrative. But in the end, God of War is a thing of its own, separate not just from its outside inspirations, but from its franchise predecessors as well. It brings an array of new mechanics to the table, it functions as a sequel to the older God of War games, and it works as a beginning to a new saga. It is more than just the sum of its parts. Once the credits have finally rolled, it's pretty clear. God of War may have began on the shoulders of giants, but now it's become a giant of its own.